A young white girl had been left strung up at the edge of the burned-out Rosewood settlement, a crudely painted sign above her that read, Indian Land. It was late summer, 1873, and the northern plains were quiet. Too quiet. The wind blew low through the ruins, carrying with it the bitter scent of scorched wood and dried blood. Smoke still whispered from the wreckage-charred homes, broken fences, blackened crops. The sky itself looked smudged, sullen with ash dot at what had once been the settlement's main gate. A grim silhouette stood out. The gate's wooden frame, once a symbol of new beginnings, now held a teenage girl suspended from the beam. Clara May, just 19, hung there with her wrists bound tightly above her head. Dried blood marked the side of her face, trailing down her neck. Her dress, once a pale blue, was torn and filthy with soot. Her feet were bare. She looked lifeless at first glance, but her chest rose faintly, still alive. Beside her, the message, in blood-red paint, told its story. Indian Land. A few warriors remained nearby. Their horses grazed on patches of withered grass. One man, heavy-set and still wearing streaks of war paint, looked toward the gate. Let them see this, he said. Flatly, let them all know what stealing costs. A younger warrior hesitated. She's only a girl. She wore their colors. She shares their debt. Another figure moved from the edge of the square, slender, quiet, dressed in buckskin. His hair was long, tied back with a faded red strip of cloth. His name was Tyen. Though born of Comanche blood, there was no vengeance. In his gaze, he looked up at Clara, barely conscious, flies buzzing around her wounds. And I'll carry mine, he said. The others turned to him sharply. What are you doing, Comanche? She breathes, he replied calmly. She's not gone yet. She's still one of us human. Without waiting for consent, Tyen unsheathed a clean knife from his belt and approached the gate. He stepped onto the beam's support, the charred wood groaning under his weight. Cut that rope, and you step outside the circle. One of the men warned. Tyen didn't answer. He climbed, the smoke and sunlight brushing against his face, and reached the crossbeam. Clara's eyelid flickered, open, then shut again. In one swift motion, he sliced the rope. Her body fell forward weightless, broken, and he caught her. He descended carefully, holding her like something fragile. The sign above them creaked in the wind, then fell still. Around them, the warriors muttered, some turning away. One spat at the dirt, but none moved to stop him. Tyen walked through what was left of Rosewood, past shattered glass, collapsed rooftops, and burned walls until the place was behind him. At the old well near the tree line, his horse stood waiting. He laid Clara gently across the rolled blankets slung over the saddle. She stirred as he climbed up. Her lips parted. Let me go, she croaked. He said nothing. She blinked through the haze, saw his face's skin. His feathers, his silence and panic overtook her. She twisted violently, falling from the horse and crashing to the ground. With a grunt of pain, she began to crawl, dragging herself through dust and splinters, reaching for the trees. Tyen dismounted and came toward her. No, she rasped. Her arms trembled. Don't. She fumbled for a stone, swung it with what little strength she had but missed. Then her voice cracked wide open. Just kill me, she cried. You savages took everything already. Tears ran down her dirt-streaked cheeks. Her body shook and then gave out. The stone rolled from her fingers. Her forehead hit the earth. Tyen knelt beside her. He gently brushed the dust from her skin, his fingers slow and careful. He did not look at her as an enemy, nor merely a victim, but as something far too human to be abandoned. He lifted her again, secure in his arms. His voice was soft. You're not gone yet. Asterisk, asterisk, he whispered something barely audible and carried her into the trees. The stream murmured as it wound through the pine forest, catching faint shards of light through the overcast sky. Tucked beneath, a ridge and swallowed by overgrown brush, stood a long abandoned cabin, its wooden beams bleached by sun, the roof patched with bark and mud. A forgotten place, claimed by no one. That's where Tyen took her. Clara barely moved during the journey. Her head lolled against the saddle blanket, lips cracked from thirst and sunburn. Tyen didn't speak. When they arrived, he gently lifted her from the horse and brought her inside. The space was small and musty, filled with the scent of moss and damp wood. Dust rose as he laid her on a mat of woven grass. He built a fire, then poured water from his canteen and soaked a cloth to cool her fevered brow. She woke at dusk. Her eyes opened wide, and she screamed, "Stay away from me." Her voice was weak, but her panic cut through the stillness. She pushed herself toward the corner, grimacing with each movement, her ribs clearly aching. Tyan said nothing. He placed the wet cloth within her reach and stepped outside to sit by the fire, giving her space. Neither of them slept that night. At dawn, Clara tried to leave. She stumbled down the slope, made it as far as the tree line, but her ankle gave way, and she collapsed. She awoke with her face pressed into pine needles, her dress snagged on thorns, arms refusing to lift. Tyan found her there, crouching beside her without a word. "Don't touch me," she gasped. He didn't. He waited. When she could no longer bear the pain, she turned her face to the side. He lifted her again slowly, carefully, and carried her back to the shelter. Still, he said nothing. No scolding, no reprimand. The second time she tried to flee was at dusk. She dragged herself to the creek, but fainted in the mud. Tyan found her there, unconscious, and brought her back once more. By the third time, she no longer tried. When she woke and realized she was wrapped in a blanket again, her frustration turned to fury. She threw it off. "Why don't you just kill me like the others?" she snapped. Tyan sat across from her, legs folded, palms resting open on his knees. "I didn't burn your home," he said softly, "but I saw who did." Her breath caught. "My people," he continued. "Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, they were the ones. I won't lie." Her lips trembled. "If they took a home from you," he said, "then I'll give one back." She flinched at that, uncertain whether his words were kindness or another way to control her. He stood slowly and left the shelter. Later, the scent of something warm drifted in, not fire, but broth. He returned with a clay bowl, steam rising in the cool air. Clara sat upright now, back pressed against the wall, her wrists swollen and fingers stiff. She eyed him with suspicion. He knelt beside her and held out the bowl. When she didn't take it, he noticed her hand could no longer grip. Without a word, he dipped the spoon, cooled it with a breath, and gently brought it to her lips. She parted them slightly. The first taste scraped down her throat, but the second went easier. She coughed once, then kept going. She studied his face as he fed her. No fire in his eyes, no judgment, just calm, just presence, solid, steady. "What's your name?" she asked quietly between spoonfuls. "Tyan," he replied. She nodded faintly. Her hand curled around the edge of the blanket. Outside, the wind stirred the pines. Inside, for the first time in days, she closed her eyes, not from pain, but from something warmer. Not safety, exactly, but its outline. Days slipped by under the shaded ridge, not tracked by hours or dates, but by the shifting sunbeams through cracked wallboards. Clara's body healed in pieces. Bruises faded to pale yellow, cuts softened into pink seams. Trust, however, came slower if at all. She still flinched at snapping branches, still froze when Tyan moved too quickly, but she no longer ran. Instead, she watched him. He spoke rarely, walked barefoot across the floor, never slammed anything, never raised his voice. When he did speak, it was with few, careful words in English. He would say in the mornings, placing warm bread on a folded cloth, water when he came back from the stream, shirt clinging to his shoulders, hair damp. Then, one afternoon, when a distant thunderclap made her curl into herself like a frightened child, he knelt beside her and placed his hand to the earth. "Safe," he said gently, "not war." She looked at him, unsure, but some worn-out part of her wanted to believe. Tyan never forced anything, never hovered. Each morning, he rose before her and left small things by the door: dried meat, berries, a chunk of cornbread wrapped in cloth. She never saw him leave them, but they were always there, waiting like offerings. And gradually, the shape of fear began to shift, not vanish, but soften, not trust, but something near it. They offered each other quiet, unspoken truths. He slept near the hearth, she kept to the far wall. The space between them wasn't out of fear or distance, it was a choice. One misty morning, with ash still lingering in the air and the forest, damp with silence, Clara stepped outside and spotted him seated on a flat stone. He was bent over a piece of wood, no larger than a loaf of bread, his knife moving carefully, not cutting, but coaxing something into form. She didn't interrupt, only watched from a distance, her arms crossed against the morning chill. That afternoon, after he had gone to fetch water, Clara returned to that stone and examined what he had been shaping. It was a bird or something like it, its wings half lifted, its beak tilted skyward. The carving was rough, but carried a strange kind of life, like it wasn't finished being born yet. She touched its wings gently, then pressed her thumb against its jagged edge. That evening, when he came back and saw her by the fire with the carving in her lap, she didn't hide it. She looked at him and said, almost in a whisper, "If you carve me wings, I'll try to fly." He said nothing, but something behind his eyes shifted, almost imperceptibly. The next day, she joined him to gather firewood. Her movements were clumsy, her ankles still ached, and her arms lacked strength. But she carried a small bundle back without falling. He noticed, though he made no comment. That night, she stirred the stew while he cut roots in silence. It was a simple moment, the kind that might pass unnoticed, until she spilled too much salt into the pot and muttered under her breath. He raised an eyebrow, looked up, and said with dry amusement, "Bad magic." She blinked and then laughed, a short, surprised sound, but real. He tilted his head, lips tugging upward just slightly, not quite a smile, but close. They ate beside each other in the glow of firelight, not touching, but near enough that warmth passed between them. The stew smelled of wild onion and slow-cooked bones. They didn't speak much, but something passed between their silences, a quiet understanding. When she burned her tongue, he offered her a cool drink with a faint, amused grunt. Later, when he forgot to stir the pot and it scorched at the bottom, she sniffed the air and said, "Tastes like revenge." He chuckled. The sound was rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. As they cleaned their bowls afterward, she looked over and asked, "Why do you live out here alone?" He hesitated. "Too many graves," he finally said. Then, quieter, "None of them mine." She didn't press further. It was enough. That night, lying on her bed of woven reeds and patched furs, she stared across the room at the carved bird now resting on a wooden shelf. Its wings were still incomplete, but something in its shape stirred her, not grief, but a flicker of something softer. She didn't love him, not yet, and he hadn't asked her to. But for the first time since everything had burned, she felt a little less like a ghost, more like someone alive again. A girl sharing food with someone who didn't feel like a stranger anymore. In the silence between them, something gentle had sparked, not a fire to consume but one to keep them warm. That weak winter crept down from the hills earlier than expected. The wind pressed against the walls of the lodge like a warning, and the fire inside crackled low, its smoke rich with pine and broth. Clara sat close to the hearth, knees drawn beneath the hide blanket he had mended the day before. She traced the stitching absently, not from cold, but from the stillness. Beside her, time carved again. The blade murmured as it moved through the wood. The bird was changing, more feathers now, wings open wider. She watched him work for a long time before she finally spoke, her voice dry and quiet. "They murdered my parents," she said, still watching the flames. "Not in a fight, just walked in, shot my father in the back while he was at the stove, dragged my mother outside and cut her throat." Tyne didn't flinch, didn't speak. "My sister tried to run. She was 14. They caught her, took her." Clara swallowed. "I don't know if she's still alive." The fire cracked loudly, but the silence remained heavy. "I hid in the root cellar," she continued, hands clasped in her lap, watched through a floorboard crack as they burned the Thompsons in their cabin. "I saw Mr. Thompson try to shield. His baby didn't help. They all burned." She looked over at him. Her eyes were dry, but glowing with something that lived deeper than tears. "They painted the doors in blood. I'll never forget the smell." Tyne finally put his carving down. His voice came slow, deep like the ground shifting beneath ice. "I wasn't there," he said, "but my people were." Her body tensed, but she didn't move away. I was taken by the Comanche when I was 5, he added. My real parents, I don't remember them. Just fire, screaming, then nothing. He leaned back, gazing up at the beams overhead. There was a woman in the tribe. She had no sons, so she took me and raised me. But you weren't one of them, Clara said softly. He shook his head, to pale, hair to light, eyes like a coyote. They said, I learned to fight, to hunt, to ride, but I never belonged. She tilted her head. Why did they keep you? He gave a dry, quiet smile. Because I lived, that made me useful. A long pause. And why did you help me? She finally asked. Tyne met her eyes. He didn't look away. His voice was quiet, but sure, because if someone had helped me, he said, maybe I wouldn't be so good at being alone. The words settled between them like another log added to the fire, not loud, but steady, a warmth that stayed. ***. The gift wasn't meant to persuade or impress, it was simply honest. Clara looked down at her hands, still clutching the hide blanket. Her chest ached not from rage or dread, but from something sharper and stranger, recognition. They hadn't shared the same paths, hadn't come from the same people, but pain had etched its signature across both their lives in similar strokes. She rose quietly and walked to the small pile of odds and ends Tayan had been collecting over the last few weeks, bits of leather, sinew, broken fasteners, scraps of cloth. Kneeling down, she selected a piece of soft hide and returned to the fire. Tayan watched silently as she threaded a needle with slow, trembling fingers. Still healing from her injured wrist, the stitches were small and uneven, but her focus didn't waver. Gradually, the fabric began to take the shape of a simple handkerchief, rough-edged, but whole. When she finished the border, she glanced up at him. I've never sewn before, she said softly. My mother did, but I was always too clumsy. He shrugged gently. Looks hold to me. Her smile was faint, but genuine. Then she picked up the needle again and stitched one final word into the corner, blocky, crooked letters. Teen. She held it out to him. He didn't reach for it right away, just looked at it like he couldn't decide whether to feel honored or ashamed. It's not much, Clara admitted, but it's the first thing I've made that wasn't just to survive. At last, he took it carefully, like it might fall apart, and folded it with reverence. Then, for the first time since the night he'd cut her down from that tree, he spoke her name. Clara. She met his gaze not as a prisoner, not as an outsider, but as to people bound by scars carved from the same flame, just on different ends of its fury. The morning was still, hushed with the weight of something about to change. Mist draped the forest, softening the birdsong, muffling the breeze. Tayan had gone out early, checking snares near the ravine. Clara sat by the fire, grinding acorns and humming a wordless hymn. For a moment, the world felt quiet, distant from war. Then came the hoof beats, barely perceptible at first, like murmurs in the earth. But Tayan sensed them. He froze, turned eastward, muscles taut. Clara stepped outside with a basket in hand and saw him staring into the fog. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer. Figures took shape, bare-chested men with painted skin and bone necklaces, leather fringe swaying with each step. Comanche warriors, 6 in total. The leader stepped forward, eyes locked on Tayan. You are not forgotten, he said in their tongue, nor forgiven. Tayan stood his ground. I left the war behind. You brought it back. The man's eyes flicked to Clara. You hide what we marked. She was meant to burn. You sheltered her. She wasn't fire, Tayan answered. She was ash. Another man advanced, voice sharper. She is the stain. If she lives, they'll think we didn't finish. The line must hold. Tayan stepped between them. And Clara, you will not touch her. The warriors moved. One grabbed his shoulder. Tayan shoved him off, and then it erupted. They struck him hard, fists, elbows, the butt of a spear to the ribs. Clara screamed as he collapsed, blood painting his face. But even kneeling, he shielded her. She is mine to protect, he roared. You don't get to finish what you started. But he was outnumbered. They dragged him away, heels scraping through the dirt. Clara, run, he shouted. She did not aimlessly, but to the ravine, to the moss-covered cave. She squeezed inside, pressing her hands over her mouth to muffle the sobs. Outside, the noise faded. The hoofbeats disappeared. Silence settled like dust. She waited minutes, maybe longer, until her knees throbbed and her chest hurt from holding her breath. Then she crept back. "Tayan," she called, voice trembling. He lay slumped near the fire pit. Blood crusted at his temple. His chest rose, faintly. She dropped beside him, shaking as she brushed hair from his face. His eyes fluttered open. "You stayed," he murmured. And then he went still. The next days blurred into one long moment. Fear, sweat, desperation. His fever worsened. He mumbled incoherently, called her name, and others she didn't recognize. She tried everything: cool cloths, bitter teas, crushed roots, but nothing helped. On the 5th morning, hollow and exhausted, she packed a satchel, tied a blade to her waist, and left. She crawled through thorny brush, dug through river moss, scraped bark with bleeding fingers. A snake hissed near her boots, but she didn't flinch. She didn't stop. By nightfall, she returned, arms full of herbs and hope. She boiled what she'd gathered, spoon-fed him, wiped his brow, and sang to him gently. "Stay with me," she whispered, holding his limp hand. "Please stay." At dawn, his fever broke. His eyes opened, red and tired but clear. "You came back," he rasped. "I never left," she replied, and the tears came freely when he closed his eyes again. It wasn't from pain. It was rest. It was peace. He awoke to the scent of smoke, not of fire or danger, but healing herbs smoldering low in the flames. The fire crackled in the pit beside him, casting a soft glow against the wooden shelter. Every part of his body ached, but it was the ache of surviving. ****. The pain in his skull still echoed like dull waves, pulsing with each breath. But the fever had broken. The fire crackled real, steady, grounding. He was still here, alive. Clara sat near the hearth, legs tucked beneath her, wrapped tightly in a blanket. Her hair hung in tangled knots, her face pale, streaked with soot and fatigue. But her eyes stayed open, locked on the flames, defying the pull of sleep. Her head dipped once, then again, fighting the exhaustion, until the faint sound of movement stirred her. She looked up sharply, startled. Their eyes met. He didn't speak, his lips cracked, his throat raw, but his gaze held a question, soft and amazed. Clara leaned forward, quietly poured water into a metal cup, and brought it to his mouth. He drank slowly, flinching at the sharp, bitter taste of herbs. She set the cup aside and reached for a damp cloth, gently wiping the sweat from his forehead. "You stayed," he rasped, barely audible. She didn't smile. She didn't weep. She just nodded. He let his eyes close again, feeling the heat of the fire seep into his bones, listening to her steady breath beside him. "I thought," he began. "I know," she said, cutting him off with quiet certainty. She shifted closer. "You kept saying my name," she whispered, "even when you could hardly breathe." He opened his eyes again. The firelight painted shadows across her face, making her seem older, carved by something deeper than time. There was no fear in her now, no trembling, no retreat. "I heard you," she murmured, "even when I hid, even when I was too scared to come out." He didn't ask why she came back. He didn't need to. In the days that followed, he mended. Slowly, strength returned in small fragments. Clara brought him soup, changed his bandages, eased him upright when the pain in his ribs grew sharp. She never once spoke of leaving. Each morning, as the light spilled through the trees and painted the clearing gold, Clara would find a new offering outside the door. The first morning, it was a silver-gray feather tied with leather. The next, a clay pot with a sprouting plant, its roots wrapped in moss. Then, a stone carved with two birds, one in flight, the other resting. Finally, one morning, she found the completed carving. A wooden bird, wings outstretched, chest lifted, eyes wide open. It sat on a flat stone in the morning light. She picked it up, running her fingers across the grooves, feeling the care and effort in every line. When she brought it inside, Tayan was awake, a blanket over his shoulders, sitting upright. Their eyes met again, and this time, no questions lingered between them. She placed the bird on the mantel above the fire, then sat beside him, their shoulders touching. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. She hadn't stayed out of obligation. She hadn't come back because she owed him anything. She chose to. Two souls once fractured, now choosing the same place to begin again. The home they built wasn't fancy. There were no glass windows or painted shutters, and the floors creaked when stepped on, but it stood firm atop the ridge overlooking the stream. It was made of thick logs and packed earth, the roof covered in bark and hides to keep out the rain. The old lean-to had been dismantled, piece by piece, and transformed into something stronger. Every plank bore the work of both their hands, every stone in the hearth was placed with care. Clara dug out the root cellar herself, palms blistered, but her face proud. Tyen carved the doorway, adding small, personal patterns, not symbols, just marks that were entirely theirs. When they finished, when the house was no longer just a shelter, but something meant to hold life, Clara took a piece of pine, smoothed it down, and carved, with slow precision, a few simple words: Home of Clara and Tyen, where no one is left hanging. She nailed the sign above the doorway herself. Late that summer, they found a child. They were deep in the forest, searching for honeycomb, when they followed the faint sound of crying. Under a collapsed wagon, buried in leaves, they discovered a small boy, maybe 5 years old. His clothes were torn, his temple bruised, his wide eyes ancient with fear. He didn't speak for 3 days. They brought him home, gave him warm broth, let him sleep near the fire. Tyen gave him space. Clara gave him gentle words: fire, blanket, safe. On the 4th day, he took Clara's hand and whispered, Anina. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes stung. It was Comanche. Mother. Later that week, as Tyen knelt beside him to fix a broken toy wheel, the boy said, Panna? Tyen paused, then smiled. Father. They never questioned him about where he came from. They didn't ask what he had seen. It was enough that he stayed, that he laughed, that he slowly learned the alphabet as Clara drew it on smooth bark with charcoal, that he ate beside them, that sometimes in sleep he called out names they didn't recognize. That year, they planted crooked rows of corn, built a chicken coop, sang songs without words. On warm evenings, they sat beneath the stars, the boy between them, pointing at constellations. Tyen gave each one a name from his people's stories. In time, travelers began to pass through, wanderers, traders, those with no place to go. Some stayed a night, some shared seeds, advice, or tales from faraway towns. All were given food, all were safe. The house on the ridge became more than a refuge. It became a promise. They dreamed of a place untouched by cruelty, a place where no one was hunted, no one left behind, no one judged by the shade of their skin or the blood that ran through their veins. And each morning, as sunlight spilled over the treetops, that weathered wooden sign above the doorway glowed with quiet grace. Home of Clara and Tyen, where no one was left hanging. Time moved slowly, like water shaping stone. The seasons left their gentle fingerprints in the wrinkles around their eyes, silver in their hair. The house on the ridge endured, its roof aged. Its garden ran wild, more mint than corn now, but birds still built nests in the eaves. Smoke curled from the chimney each morning, and the sign above the door, though faded, never broke. Home of Clara and Tyen, where no one was left hanging. One fall morning, long after their adopted child had grown and started a family of his own, strangers arrived. Government men. Their boots gleamed, their collars were stiff, their voices clipped and practiced like courtroom rehearsals. They brought rolled-up maps, bold words, and tidy promises. A railroad would soon run through that ridge. The country needed the land. They were offering payment, they said, but either way, the tracks would come. Clara stood in the doorway with flour on her hands, the scent of bread rising behind her. Her spine was upright, her eyes weathered but unwavering. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly toward the home behind her. That roof was patched after a war. She said, her voice steady, those walls were raised by hands that used to bleed. The men exchanged unsure glances. This isn't just land. It was built on grief and grace. We won't sell that. Tyen joined her then, quiet as always. He said nothing, just stood beside her, his frame still solid despite the curve of age. He looked at the trees, the path worn by their grandson's bare feet, the garden growing wild and stubborn. Then he looked at Clara and gave a slow, firm nod. The men left not long after. A week later, someone nailed a new sign to the post near the rocky trail. Just past the last scatter of wildflowers, carved into it were these words: not Indian land, not white land, just loved land. And beneath that, in Clara's careful handwriting, we already found what we were looking for. Over time, their home became something more. It became a sanctuary. People came, the forgotten, the lost, a runaway girl, a scarred boy, a woman who had buried too many babies. They brought only what pain they carried, and they were met with warmth, fed, given a place to sleep, taught how to fish, to sew, to read the stars. Some stayed, some healed and moved on, but none forgot the firelight or the quiet couple who never asked about the past. Clara still hung herbs near the hearth. Tyne still carved little birds, even though his hands trembled now. Their son came often. Children and children, who called them Enna and Panna. On sunlit afternoons, they'd sit beneath the old oak tree and tell stories. Some were true, some were softened by time, and each night, when the house settled into silence, Clara would lie beside Tyne, their backs shaped like puzzle pieces molded by decades. Her hand would rest on his shoulder, brushing over the old scars, and she'd whisper, "You gave me more than a home, you gave me a life." He would answer, not always with words, but with a low murmur, a sound that meant yes, that meant he knew, that meant thank you. They never left that ridge, and after they were gone, the house remained. Travelers still found the trail. They still saw the sign, not Indian land, not white land, just loved land, and some wept. Because in a world divided by walls and names and wounds, someone had once chosen to build a home on something else, on mercy, on memory, on love. If this story stirred something quiet inside you, if Clara's strength and Tyne's silence wrapped around you like a promise, then you felt what lives at the heart of these stories we tell. Stories from the old wild lands tales, not just of love, but of redemption, of loyalty when laws failed, of gentle hands after long heartbreak. Love like this doesn't wait for permission. It simply stays. If you believe that broken places can bloom again, if you believe in love that dares to rise beyond history, hate, and division, then don't just listen. Join us. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Share this tale with someone who still hopes. Because out here in the dust and distance of the frontier, love was never easy, but it was always worth it. Asterisk.